So today's daf is daf Chof Dalet. Now we're studying the episode of Doma ben Nesina, who's a non-Jew, and he had access to the Avnei Shoham, which were very expensive, and even to the Paraduma. And one time they wanted to buy the Avnei Shoham for the ephod at a very high price, and they were willing to pay him b'shishim ribo schar, 600,000 golden dinrim, and Rav Kahana Masnei b'shmonim ribui. According to the version of Rav Kahana, it was 800,000 golden dinrim. However, hayu maftechos munochas tachas rashosim shal ovi v'lo tziro. So Dom ben Esina did not want to wake up his father, and this is a case of kibud av of the highest level, and it seems that they could have taken the monies, or in this case the stones of great value, from an akum, an idol worship, and used it for the mizbeach, for the mikdash. Now that's a question, because we were studying here on Daf Chav Gimel and Beis the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, and according to him, he learns the yikhu truma as if it says the kachu truma, meaning that we have to take truma from a Yisrael. We cannot take truma that has kedusha, in this case, what's called kedushas gvulin, and use it for kodesh. How much more so in the case of Avnei Shoham, which is a kedusha in the mikdash itself, that's on a higher level than truma. For sure, we're not allowed to take from a guy. So the Gemara answers that there's a special halacha with regard to Avnei Shoham that we derive from the pasuk, and it teaches us that you're allowed to receive the Avnei Shoham from the akum, because Avnei Shoham hifsik ha'inyan. Because if you read the pasuk in Parshas Truma, after it says Daber b'nei Yisrael v'yikluli Truma, then there's a hefsek, and then it says Zav v'chesef u'nechoshes, and finally, about 5 psukim later, it mentions Avnei Shoham. Now, every time in Parshas Truma, when it goes from one contribution to the other, it's always connected with a vav. The only exception is Avnei Shoham. It doesn't say ve'avnei Shoham, and the absence of the letter vav indicates that Avnei Shoham, hifsik ha'inyan, has its own status, and we're permitted to take and receive the Avnei Shoham from the akum. Frekta Gemara, v'ha v'avnei meluim ksiv tahader orve. In other words, even though there's no vav on the words Avnei Shoham, but immediately afterwards it says Avnei Meluim, but it adds the vav ve'avnei Meluim, so that the Avnei Meluim should cover not only the Avnei Meluim, but even the Avnei Shoham, and that's called Hadar Arve. The Gemara rejects this for another reason. V'od, furthermore, Ktani Seifa, L'shon Acheres Nodalo Paraduma, Bi'edro. So although on the first round, before the year was up, Doma ben Esina had Avnei Shoham to offer the Mikdash, but he didn't want to wake up his father. A year later, he had a Paraduma, which is worth an incredible amount of money. It's so rare. And once again, the key to the paradum was underneath his father's thing. You would pay me all the money in the world. I know that. But on the first round, you were willing to pay me, let's say, 600,000 gold dinrim for the Avnei Shoham. that's money that I lost because I didn't want to wake up my father. Now I don't have to wake up my father. I can give you the paraduma at the same price. I just don't, I want to offset my losses. And now the Gemara asks, well, according to Rabbi Eliezer, this doesn't make any sense because paraduma has the status of a chatos, even though it's not a korban chatos technically, but the Torah calls it chatos to teach me that you can't take it from a guy. So how could we have taken the paraduma by purchasing it from Dom ben Esina at the value of Shishim Ribu? And the Gemara answers, Hasam al Yidei Tagra Yisrael Zov. The pasuk that excludes buying from a guy only applies if you buy it directly from a guy. If a Jew buys it from a guy, and then we, Hegdesh, or the Beis Hamikdash wants to buy it from the Jew, so it went through the middleman of a Jew, that's okay, even according to Rabbi Eliezer. So what happened is that the paraduma did not go directly from Dom ben Esina, the idol worshiper, straight to the Mikdash, but rather it went to other Jews, and then we bought them from the Jews, and even Rabbi Eliezer would allow you to do that. But now the question is, when you buy a para from a guy, how do you know that no one had a bestial relationship with that guy, what we call sodomy in fancy English? And the din is that Revia passes a korban, and presumably since paradum is called by the Torah chatas, the psul of nirva should apply to paraduma. So when we bought the para from the Jew who bought it from Dom ben Esina, who guaranteed us that it wasn't a nirva? And we have a principle that the akum are choshed al revia. But Tanya Amru Lo Rabbi Eliezer Ma'asav Lakhua Min Ha'ovek Chovim B'Dama Shmo. They bought the paraduma from Dom ben Esina, who's an idol worshiper. How could that possibly be? Maybe the animal is a nirva. The Amri law, and there's another Lishna Basra that says Ramatz Shmo, that his name was not Doma, but rather Ramatz. But in any event, whether his name was this or his name was that, he was certainly an Oved Kochavim. Omer Lahem Rabbi Eliezer, Yisham Raya, Yisrael Hayumeshamrim Osam Mishosh and Nolda. This is an unbelievable Gemara. The Gemara is going to somehow prove that the Jewish people supervised this para and they could guarantee that it wasn't a nirva from the time of its birth. So again, ordinarily, a para or any korban that you purchase from an idol worship would be possible because we have to assume it's a nirva. But here we know it's not a nirva because the people of Israel oversaw and guarded this para from the moment it was born. Frekti Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer Tarte Islay, Kicha, V'chayish Nami L'Revia. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer has to solve two problems in being machshir this paraduma coming from Dom ben Esina. Number one, Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion Kicha that it has to be taken and purchased from a Jew. That we solved because there's going to be a Jewish middleman who buys it from Doma. But there's a second problem, V'chayish L'Revia. And we're going to have to solve that problem by guaranteeing that the Jews guarded the para from the time of its Leda, and they can testify that there was no Revia. Gemara is not happy with that either. Omar Mar, Yisrael Mishamrim also Misha Shenolda. Rabbi Eliezer is going to add this answer that they watched and guarded the cow from the time of its birth. That's not going to solve our problem. Maybe the mother of that cow was a nirva. Nechush dimar ravai liime ki have ma'avra. Okay, right now the Gemara is saying that there was possibly an act of sodomy done to the mother when she was pregnant with this paraduma. And Omar Rava, we have a statement of Rava, Vlad hanogacha sasura, and he who vlada nogchu, and vlada nirva asura, he who vlada nirva. Which means the following, that if a cow gives birth to a calf, and that mother, the mother of that calf, was a shor nagchon, which means that she killed a Jew, and therefore has to be stoned under the law of shor niskal, the vlad is pasul mizbeach. Why? Says Rav an amazing concept, that the act of negicha on the part of the mother para who's pregnant relates not just to the mother, but also to the vlad, as if the vlad itself was part of the ma'aseh negicha and was responsible for the death of a Jew, and therefore has the same status as his mother, which would mean it has to be niskal and it's pasul mizbeach. Same thing in a case of a pregnant cow that was a nirva. Not only is the mother cow pasul mizbeach as a nirva, but the revia was an act in which the vlad itself was a participant, and therefore the vlad has the same status as the mother, and it's a nirva. So in order for Rabbi Eliezer to guarantee that the parah that we buy, which is a parah aduma from the guy, is not a nirva, you would have to guarantee that even during the period of pregnancy, the mother was not subject to an act of sodomy. And therefore, the Gemara says, we're going to have to rewrite the whole script and say, Yisrael here Mishamrim Osa Misha Shenotzra, that the Jewish people who guarded the parah guarded it from the time that it was created as a vlad in its mother's womb, meaning that the mother herself was not a nirva. And that's going to lead us to a different question about what happens if the mother was a nirva and then she became pregnant. What's the status of the vlad? Perhaps the act of sodomy took place in the mother cow before she was pregnant, and Isnan, and we have a Mishnah in Masechta Tmura. Okay, we have a while till we get to Tmura. And the Mishnah says, Kol psulim legabi mizbech v'lodoseyem mutarim v'tani Allah Rabbi Eliezer Oser. The Tanakama, the Mishnah in Tmura Daf Lamed, is of the Mekil opinion, and he's lenient, and he says that if the act of sodomy took place before the mother was pregnant, then although the mother herself as a nirva is pasul mizbeach, but the vlad is not pasul mizbeach, because there was no act of revere that took place after the conception of the vlad. But Rabbi Eliezer is machmir, and he holds that once the mother became a nirva, if she becomes pregnant, she passes on that psul of nirva to the vlad. So Gemara says the following: Hanichalu Rava, my kasha, an objection to Rabbi Eliezer is predicated on Rava. Tiyamar Rava Rav Nachmach Lokes Kishen Nirvu Kshehem Mukdashim. that when the Tanakama says that you could be makil as far as Vlad, because the mother became a nirva before she became pregnant, that only applies when the revia took place after the mother was already mukdashin, which means that she was already consecrated for the Mizbeach. So the Tana Kama of Rabbi Eliezer is Mekil as far as the offspring is concerned, because she became a nirva before the conception of the offspring. Says Rava, Avol Kishein Chulin, let's say the mother was not concretized to the Mizbeach. She was Chulin, and she was sodomized. Is Divrei Hakol Mutarim. Even Rabbi Eliezer would agree that in such a case, the Vlad is not possible in Mizbeach V'Toras Vlad Hanirva. And the reason for that is because the Revia took place while the cow was Chulin. So that Revia did not generate any Chal Shem Psul. And therefore, even Rabbi Eliezer would agree that if the para, the ima, the mother cow, was subject to sodomy before she was consecrated, and then she was consecrated, then even Rabbi Eliezer would say that the Vlad is kosher l'mizbeach. So therefore, if we get back to Dom Ben Asina's red cow, we could say that even if the mother had been subject to revia, then the para that's born to that cow is still kosher, because the revia took place before the cow was consecrated. That's the sheet of Rava. But what are you going to do according to Rav Huna Bar Chinina Omer Rav Nachman, who had a different version of Rav Nachman? According to Ish Machlokes, Kishen Nirvu Kshen Chulin, when do we have the kula of the Tanakam? That's only because the revia took place before the mother was consecrated. Even the Tanakama would concede to Rabbi Eliezer that there's a psul of revia regarding the Vlad in a case where the mother was already consecrated limizbeach, and then she was victimized and subject to sodomy. Is Michael and Meimar. So what are you going to have to tell me now? You're going to have to tell me that the shmira, the guarding to make sure to guarantee that there was no revia, took place from the beginning of the mother's life. Because even way before she was consecrated, if she was subject to revia, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Vlad is a Vlad and Gachas. And therefore, Ema, the Gemara says we have no choice, but we have to rewrite the original Brisa. Yisrael ha'imeshamrel soli ima mishoshan otzra. Not only were they guarding the Vlad, but they were even guarding the mother, but not from the moment that she became pregnant, but from the moment that she was born into this world. Frek the Gemara, that doesn't solve my problem either. V'nechush dilma ravua le'ima de'ima. What happens if the bubby cow, the alta bubba, the grandmother cow, was subject to revia? And therefore she's going to now transfer that psul of revia, even though she's chulin, over to Havlad, and from Havlad to the Vlad, which is the paraduma. So you're going to have to say that we have to guard even the grandmother from the time that she was born to make sure that she wasn't subject to sodomy. And the Gemara answers, Kuli hai lo chashinon. Now, honestly, I'm not sure I understand those words of the Gemara, Kuli hai lo chashinon. What does it mean, Kuli hai lo chashinon? You're telling me that the akum are chashid on revia. So we can go back many, many generations, and somewhere along the line, there was a psul of revia. So what's kuli hai lo chashinon? So I looked here in the Mefarshim, and I don't know what they're telling me by telling me to look up the Tosas Rid. I don't have access to the Tosas Rid, but I have a suspicion that the psul of Vlad Anegachas, or in our case, Vlad Hanirvas only applies to the mother passing it down to the child. It doesn't even apply to the grandmother. Omar Mar, we learned Yisrael Yemishaminosam Mishoshin Notzra Minoyadina. What's going on over here? They hired a group of Jews to guard this parah, the mother cow, because they assumed that the mother cow was going to give birth to a red heifer, to a paraduma. Paraduma is so rare. Why would they have bothered going through this whole tircha? Were they Nevi'im? Well, could they look at the cow and know that the cow is carrying in her body a paraduma?
Right.
Like I was in Tzfas for Shabbos, so they told us about the Arizal, that he could look at your face, at your forehead, and he could tell you things about yourself that you don't even know. So what they looked at the face or the forehead of the cow, and they knew that she was carrying a red
Right.
heifer. Rav Kahana kos adom avirin lefaneh b'shosha olo lezoch. This reminds me of the parsha of Nekudim, Verudim, of Yaakov Avinu in the flock of Lavan. So you take this parah and you mate it with a male, and at the moment that the male climbs on top of the female, they pass a cup of red liquid before the mother, and she already has in her mind some sort of image of a red color, and then she's going to produce a red offspring. So if that be the case, Rabbo say, why is a red heifer so rare? Why is it so rare? Why is it so expensive? If there are only two black hairs in the entire paraduma, it's possible. So why is it that apparently the Chazal made a decision that with the cows of these idolaters, let's say it was Dom Ben Essina, if we want to say, that they would pass this cupful of red wine, red whatever it was, liquid, in front of the cow to make sure that she would produce a paraduma. Rav Kahana bimuchzekes. Apparently, there was a rumor going around. The word was out on the street about this whole herd of cows, this whole group of cows, maybe from Switzerland, I don't know where they were, that they had a tendency of producing red heifers. So therefore, they took the initiative to hope that maybe Doma ben Essina, who had this herd, would finally have, and they made sure that these cows would not be sodomized. Yosef Rabbi Ami Rabbi Yitzchak Nafchatla, the Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Posachad Binay V'Omar, V'chein Hoya Rabbi Eliezer Posach B'chol Karbonos Kulon. Rabbi Eliezer holds that this halacha that we said, that you have to buy the animal from a Jew and not from a guy, applies to all karbanos. Any carbon you want to bring, you have to guarantee that you purchase that carbon from a Jew and not from a guy. Pasach idach minayu v'yomar, but the other shita said the following: Mayo sivu lechavroi l'Rabbi Lazar. What happened was that the Chachamim rejected Rabbi Eliezer. And why did they do so? What led the Chachamim to the conclusion that you can't read the word v'yikhu the way Rabbi Eliezer read it v'yikachu? Is the pasuk says in Yeshayahu Navi, testifying, or shall I say prophesying about when the Mikdash would be built, that they'll buy from the idolaters the finest goats and sheeps, called Tzon Keder Yikovtzu Blah. So this proves that you could buy for the Mizbeach flocks of Keder that come from the Goyim, bring it on the Mizbeach, and there's no psul. Omelem Rabbi Elazar, Kulam Gerim Gruim Hem Liasid Lo. When Yeshayahu is prophesying about the future and the end of time, he's prophesying that the Goyim will want to become Gerim. They'll see the truth and the light, and they'll want to convert to Judaism. Now, we're not going to accept them as converts, but they, on their own initiative, will try to fulfill the Torah, and they certainly would therefore not have influenced us to accept an animal for sacrifice that's not royal mizbeh. Omar Rav Yosef Maikra, where do you see that Rabbi Eliezer drew his conclusion that Liasid Lavo, the Goyim, would convert? And the pasuk says, this is also at the end of Tanakh in Tzfanya Novi. Ki oz epoch el amim sofabrura. All the nations will speak a pure language. And what is that pure language? That pure language is the language of Avoda Hashem, of worship of God. They will have a united resolve. Maybe what the idol worshippers will do is they'll desist in the future, at the end of days, from worshiping idols. But how do you know that, for example, they will abandon the practice of sodomy? That the pasuk says that they'll worship God with a united resolve. And that indicates that they will resolve to worship him, and they'll be like true Jews, and they'll accept the entire moral code. Rav Papa Masni Hachi, Rav Papa, has a slightly different version, meaning not substantially different, but in terms of who said what. Rav Zvid Masni Hachi, Shavayu Amri v'chein hoyer Rabbi Eliezer posed b'chol karbanos, v'Shavayu Amri, and according to both versions, the Chachamim got up and they objected to Rabbi Eliezer, Mayu Sri Le'chai v'Zon Koltzon, Kedar Minah, and Rabbi Eliezer Kulam Gerim Grurim Hem, Liasid Lavo, Umay Krok Yos Epoch, is Maskal Dilma V'Vos Kolchamu Dahaji Bey, Amalei Abai Love Dushkei Mechad Ksiv. So again, it's just a question of who said what to whom. Substance is the same. Meisvei, you're telling me, Rabbi Eliezer, that you cannot accept an animal from an idol worshiper for the Mizbeach. Vayomer Moshe. Moshe says to the people, first he's talking to Paro, of course, and he says, Gamatem tite b'yadenu zvachim olos, your people will give me zvachim and olos. Yeah. Well, I would have answered that it's going to go through a middleman of a Jew, but the Gemara doesn't answer that. The Gemara answers Kodemat and Torah shiny. That which Rabbi Eliezer said, you cannot take the animals from a guy, from an idol worshiper, from his bath, that's after Matan Torah, but not before Matan Torah. Toshma, Vayikach Yisro Chosei Moshe Olos Vachim Elohim. It says that Yisro brought korbanos in front of God. Now, where did he get these animals from? He took them from Midian. How could they be kosher mizbeach according to Rabbi Eliezer? Once again, the Gemara answers Yisro Nami Kodem Matan Torah. That's a gigantic controversy. When did Yisro actually bring these korbanos? Was it before Matan Torah or after Matan Torah? If you're going to tell me that Yisro was before Matan Torah, he heard about the destruction of Amalek, but it was before Matan Torah, that's fine. Now I can answer that Yisro was bringing animals before Matan Torah. But what are you going to tell me according to the Lemandi Omar?